Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now.
The spaceport had the particular smell of places too far from central trade lanes. Recycled air thick with grease, spiced steam from food vendors, and the faint metallic tang of docking clamps that hadn't been serviced in years. My shuttle had given up on me 3 systems back, and after coaxing it along with what I like to call strategic percussive maintenance, also known as hitting the panel until the blinking stopped, it finally sputtered into silence above this forgotten outpost. I told myself I'd only be here long enough to barter for a part, maybe a drink, maybe both if the universe was feeling generous. It was. The mechanic looked at my ship, then at me, and made a sound halfway between a laugh and a death rattle. He quoted me a price so absurd I asked if the part came with its own star system. When he didn't laugh, I realized he wasn't joking. So I found myself wandering the dusty platforms at night, pockets lighter, mood darker, muttering under my breath about the virtues of reliable public transport. That was when I saw her. She was sitting on the edge of a stairwell where the neon of a half-broken sign flickered in uneven bursts, painting her in alternating shades of green and shadow. She had the look of someone very much out of place, shoulders hunched, arms wrapped around her knees, her long ears twitching slightly as though straining to catch something I couldn't hear. And she was barefoot. Now, in my defense, I had been raised on a mining colony where shoes optional was practically the town motto. But this wasn't warm rock under a sun. It was cold alloy, leaching heat from anyone foolish enough to touch it unprotected. My toes curled sympathetically just looking at hers. "Not to pry," I said, leaning on the railing with as much casual charm as a man in grease-stained overalls could muster. "But you do know frostbite isn't a fashion statement, right?" She glanced up, startled, her eyes catching the neon. For a moment I thought I'd been terribly rude, but instead she tilted her head and replied with a small frown, "Fashion statement." "Yeah," I said, shrugging. "You know, humans wear ridiculous things sometimes to impress each other. Shoes without soles, pants without knees, jackets with more zippers than logic. But freezing your feet off is usually not part of the catalog." Her lips quirked upward, hesitant but real. "Your species sounds impractical." "Oh, completely," I said, untying my boots. "We're so impractical that we build ships powered by unstable matter just to go places we can complain about later." I tugged one boot free with an undignified grunt. "Here, try these before your toes turn into ice cubes." She blinked at me. "You are giving me your coverings." "Boots," I corrected. "Yes. And don't worry, they only smell mildly like someone who once lost a fight with engine coolant." Her ears twitched, and she gave the tiniest laugh, though she tried to hide it behind her hand. I slipped off the second boot and nudged them toward her. She hesitated, as though the offer were far stranger than I intended, then slowly slid her feet into them. They were comically too big, her toes vanishing somewhere in the darkness of the leather. "There," I said, satisfied. "Now you look like a proper spaceport local. Just need to start complaining about docking fees and you'll blend right in." She studied me with a curious intensity that made me shift under the weight of her gaze. "You are unusual." "Unusual good or unusual bad?" I asked. Her smile widened, and this time she didn't hide it. "Unusual amusing." I bowed theatrically. "I'll take it. Most people go with annoying." The neon flickered above us again, and for a brief second the world felt oddly quiet, as if the chaos of the port had dimmed. She pulled her knees up, now with boots dangling far too large, and hugged them against her chest. The sight was almost absurd, like a child wearing a giant's shoes, but the relief in her expression wasn't something I could laugh at. We talked for a while after that, nothing earth-shattering. I complained about my shuttle. She asked about the smell of fried noodles drifting from a vendor nearby, and I explained the culinary miracle of grease plus starch. She admitted she'd never tried noodles before, and I swore then and there that it was my solemn duty to fix that injustice. She laughed again, soft and unguarded, and something about the sound made me feel lighter than I had in weeks. Eventually, though, she stood. "I should return," she said, voice quieter now, as though weighed down by something unsaid. "Wherever that is," I said. "Just remember, keep the boots. Consider it a loan payable upon return of my sanity, which, I should warn you, may take a while." She tilted her head, ears catching the light, and for a moment she looked as though she might say more. Instead, she simply nodded, the oversized boots clunking awkwardly as she walked away into the shadows of the port. I watched her go, shivering slightly as the cold bit through my socks. "Well," I muttered, "at least someone's feet are warm tonight." And with that, I limped back toward the mechanic's overpriced hovel, unaware that I'd just signed myself up for the strangest chapter of my life. Though if you'd told me that then, I would have laughed and asked if destiny also covered replacement parts. The chamber was warm, but the girl still curled her toes inside the boots, as though holding on to the last bit of heat they carried. The enormous hall around her shimmered with columns carved from translucent stone, glowing faintly with the pulse of alien circuitry embedded in their veins. Priests in silver-threaded robes stood in rows, their faces a mixture of awe and alarm. Guards kept to the edges, armor polished to a mirror sheen, eyes locked on her every move. None of them seemed capable of deciding whether to kneel or shout. She sat on a dais much too large for her, legs dangling like a child perched on a throne. The boots, scuffed and smelling faintly of grease and engine coolant, looked absurd against the polished floor. She knew it, and the thought made her smile. "It is him," one of the priests whispered, voice carrying despite his attempt at restraint. "The Star Stranger has come, the one who clothes the daughter of stars." Another hissed blasphemy. "You would place faith in a shoe." "They are not mere coverings," the first insisted, pointing at the boots. "The prophecy speaks clearly. He will give what is his to shield her feet from the cold void. Look." The girl lowered her gaze, hiding a laugh. They were arguing about shoes. Not lineage, not empires, not weapons capable of tearing planets apart shoes. She wanted to tell them that the human hadn't seemed like a prophet, just a scruffy man with a crooked grin who made jokes about noodles. But she kept her silence because deep down she understood how seriously her people clung to their myths. One of the guards approached, helmet tucked under his arm. His voice was sharp like steel being drawn. "Princess, was it freely given?" She blinked. "The boots." "Yes," his eyes narrowed. "Did he demand favor, oath, bargain?" "No," she said, shaking her head, ears twitching as she remembered. "He said only that freezing feet were not fashionable." And he made a face as though I were missing something obvious. It was amusing. The guard frowned, unaccustomed to hearing her describe anything as amusing. He bowed his head slightly and stepped back. The priests resumed their whispers, more urgent now. "It is the sign. The fleets must be summoned. The prophecy awakens." She hugged her knees against her chest, boots clunky against the shimmering dais. She should have felt overwhelmed, perhaps frightened. Instead, she felt a strange bubbling in her chest, laughter threatening to escape at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. Their entire civilization might shift because some human thought she looked cold. Meanwhile, at the far end of the system, the human in question was trying to convince the mechanic that socks counted as legal currency if you had enough of them. The mechanic's arms were crossed, expression stony. "We do not accept laundry." "They're not laundry," he protested, holding up a pair. "They're thick, high-quality synthetics, practically heirlooms. My grandmother knitted these, probably, somewhere in the factory." The mechanic stared, the human sighed. "Fine, no socks, but you can't tell me you don't see the value here. Look at the elasticity." He tugged the sock until it snapped back, nearly slapping himself in the face. "That's craftsmanship." The mechanic grunted and went back to ignoring him. Which was fine, because a shadow suddenly fell across the port, blotting out the stars. The ground trembled with the vibration of massive engines. He staggered outside, half expecting to see his shuttle finally giving up and exploding. Instead, he saw ships. Not one or two, but an entire fleet, dark silhouettes stretching across the heavens. Their hulls gleamed with light from 1,000 running lamps, their engines humming with restrained power. "Great," he muttered, shielding his eyes. "All this for unpaid docking fees. I should have left the socks." The mechanic bolted inside, pulling shutters closed and chanting prayers under his breath. Around the port, merchants fled, vendors grabbed their wares, and security personnel pretended to be suddenly very interested in anything that wasn't a sky full of warships. He stood alone in the courtyard, barefoot, grease still on his hands, staring upward as the first of the vessels descended. Back in the chamber, the girl rose to her feet. The priests gathered around, voices a chorus now. "It has begun." The fleet's answer. "The Star Stranger comes." Her ears twitched again, and she tried not to smile. If only they knew the so-called savior was at that very moment barefoot, probably making another joke no one would understand. She imagined his bewildered expression when the ships landed, and despite herself, she laughed aloud. The sound startled the priests into silence. "Princess?" one asked cautiously. She shook her head, laughter still bright in her eyes. "Nothing. Just thinking about noodles." And across the port, as the shadows of armadas swallowed the stars, the human muttered, "If they don't at least bring snacks, I'm filing a complaint." The first ship descended with the kind of precision only seen when a pilot knows their landing is going to be watched by millions of nervous people. The thrusters ignited with a roar that rattled every loose bolt in the outpost, sending dust cascading from the rafters and rattling the teeth of anyone still foolish enough to remain outside. I was one of those fools, barefoot, squinting against the wind, feeling very much like someone who had wandered into a play without reading the script. The landing struts touched the ground with the delicacy of a cat settling into a nap. The ship's hull shimmered, symbols glowing faintly in lines that pulsed like veins. Around me, shutters slammed shut, doors bolted, and the marketplace went from noisy to ghostly silent in a matter of seconds. I cupped my hands around my mouth. "If you're here about my parking permit, I swear I paid it, somewhere, probably." The ship ignored me, which, in retrospect, was probably wise. A ramp extended with a hiss, lowering slowly, dramatically, as if whoever designed it was paid per second of suspense. Figures appeared in the mist, armored soldiers with helms shaped to intimidate, cloaks trailing behind them like banners of shadow. They marched with the kind of synchronized precision that makes you wonder if they practice in front of mirrors. At their center was the girl. My boots clomped on her feet with every step, so oversized they nearly tripped her, yet she walked with the composure of someone who had been rehearsing this entrance since birth. I gawked. She spotted me immediately and broke into a grin, the kind you don't expect from someone stepping off a warship. She raised a hand in greeting, waggling her fingers. I raised mine back awkwardly. "Hey, how'd the boot—" The girl finally let her laughter escape, bright and unstoppable. She doubled over slightly, clutching her stomach, the oversized boots making her stumble. "He is exactly as the tales said, confused and barefoot." "Wait, the tales said that?" I asked, horrified. The elders nodded solemnly. I groaned. "Perfect. My legacy is going to be that barefoot idiot who handed out shoes. Just fantastic." The girl straightened, still smiling, and leaned close again. "Do not worry. They think confusion is a sign of wisdom." "Oh, wonderful," I muttered. "In that case, I'm a genius." And as the fleets outside dipped in synchronized orbit, as though bowing to a barefoot man who smelled faintly of engine grease, I realized my life had just gone wildly off script. The banquet table was at least the size of my shuttle, and that was just the appetizer section. Rows of dishes stretched into the distance like a culinary star map, glowing fruits that pulsed when you touched them, bowls of broth that changed color depending on who leaned over them, slabs of meat still sizzling on plates that hummed faintly with some kind of thermal field. I'd been in a lot of strange situations in my life, like the time I accidentally wired my navigation system into a jukebox, but this one topped them all. Armies were bowing, Councils were chanting, and I was standing barefoot at a feast fit for an emperor, trying very hard not to sneeze from the alien incense wafting overhead. The girl princess, apparently, though she had failed to mention that part, sat beside me, swinging her oversized boots under the table as though this were all perfectly normal. She caught my expression and smirked. "You are uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," I whispered back. "I've got 10 generals staring at me like I'm dessert, and this soup just changed from green to purple when I leaned in too close. Uncomfortable doesn't even scratch the surface." She nudged a plate toward me. The contents looked suspiciously like glowing worms wriggling faintly. "Eat. It is traditional." I leaned back. "So is food poisoning where I come from, but I don't go seeking it out." Her ears twitched as she stifled a laugh. "They are not poisonous, they are celebratory." I poked one with a fork. It squealed. Loudly. Every soldier in the room stiffened as if I'd just insulted their ancestors. I said quickly. "On my world we prefer our food not to scream before digestion. Personal quirk. Sorry." The girl covered her mouth, shoulders shaking with laughter. She leaned over, whispered something to the nearest elder, and the tension eased. A new plate was brought, steaming with something that smelled suspiciously like bread. I relaxed slightly. Bread I could handle. The council, however, was far from relaxed. Between bites and toasts, they peppered me with questions, though most were less questions and more verbal traps dressed as inquiries. "What wisdom guided you to offer the sacred covering? Do you foresee the renewal of our fleets? Will you lead us against the Dominion?" I nearly choked on the bread. "Lead you? I can barely lead myself out of a maintenance hatch. My greatest military achievement was once defeating a particularly stubborn vending machine." They murmured at that, as though vending machines were formidable foes. The princess leaned close again, translating my sarcasm into solemn pronouncements. From the looks on their faces, my battle with the vending machine had just become a legendary parable. By the third course, I realized something alarming. They were taking my every word as gospel. A joke about the size of my socks turned into a metaphor about resilience. My offhand remark about not trusting stew that glowed in 3 colors was declared a philosophical stance on purity. When I sneezed, they toasted it as a blessing. I whispered to her, "You're enjoying this way too much." She grinned openly. "You are perfect for this." "I'm perfect for tripping over my own feet," I muttered. And then came the duel. It began with one of the generals rising to his full, terrifying height, armor gleaming, cloak swishing like it had its own sound effects. He pointed a ceremonial blade at me. If he is truly the one, let him prove his worth in combat. I froze halfway through another bite of bread. "Combat? Against who? Please say it's not you." "It is me," the general said proudly. I sighed. "Of course it is." The council erupted into argument, some shouting that it was unnecessary, others insisting the prophecy demanded it. The princess leaned toward me, ears flicking with amusement. "Do not worry. If you die, it will be very symbolic." "Oh, that's reassuring. Maybe write that on my tombstone." The duel was arranged in the central hall, where the floor retracted to reveal a circular platform surrounded by glowing energy barriers. I was shoved onto the platform, still barefoot, armed with what looked suspiciously like a decorative spear. The general stood opposite, his own weapon humming with deadly elegance. "This is a misunderstanding," I shouted, spinning the spear nervously. "I'm not a fighter. I once sprained my wrist opening a jar of pickles." The crowd cheered, misinterpreting my panic as some kind of battle cry. The duel began with a clang of metal. The general advanced, graceful, disciplined. I retreated, flailing with the spear like someone trying to chase off a particularly aggressive goose. Somehow, my wild swings forced him to step back, his eyes narrowing as though I'd revealed a hidden strategy. "Impressive," he growled. "Impressive. I'm just trying not to impale myself." We circled. I slipped on the polished floor, stumbled, and nearly fell off the platform. The crowd gasped as if this were a daring maneuver. I scrambled upright, panting, and accidentally pressed a button on the spear. It emitted a high-pitched whine and shot a beam of light that sliced clean through the general's shoulder plate. The room went silent. The general looked at the smoldering hole in his armor, then at me. Slowly, he lowered his weapon and knelt. The audience erupted into cheers. Soldiers pounded their chests. Priests chanted. The council declared it a sign of divine favor. I sagged against the spear, heart racing. I didn't even know it had a button. The princess was laughing so hard she could barely stand. She rushed onto the platform, grabbed my hand and raised it high. "Behold," she cried, "the Barefoot warrior." I groaned. "That's it, that's my new title, isn't it?" She nodded, eyes gleaming. "Forever." As the fleet outside shifted in perfect synchronization, bowing once more, I realized there was no going back. I was trapped in their prophecy, armed with nothing but bad jokes, borrowed courage, and, apparently, a killer instinct for pressing the wrong button at exactly the right time. I woke the next morning to the sound of shouting. Not the angry merchant haggling over spice prices, kind of shouting, nor the maintenance crew dropped a plasma torch on their foot kind. This was the kind of shouting that echoed through a ship's hull and rattled around in your skull until you wanted to crawl back under the blankets. Which, incidentally, is what I tried to do. The princess tugged the covers away with merciless efficiency. She was already dressed in ceremonial robes, ears twitching with impatience. "You cannot hide," she said. "There is a council session. They are debating you." "Debating me?" I croaked, blinking against the two bright lights of the chamber. "What am I tax policy?" She smiled faintly. "Some call you a savior, others call you a dangerous disruption." "Well," I muttered, "at least nobody's calling me late for breakfast." The council chamber was already in chaos by the time we arrived. Elders shouted across the dome, robes fluttering as they gesticulated wildly. Generals stood in stern silence, their hands resting on the hilts of ceremonial blades. Priests chanted, trying to drown out the noise with hymns. It was less serious political assembly and more family reunion after too much wine. When they saw me, the noise redoubled. One elder pointed dramatically. "There he is, the barefoot stranger who disrupts our order." "Technically, I'm wearing socks," I said helpfully. The princess smothered a laugh. Another elder slammed his staff against the floor. "He mocks us. He is unfit to bear the prophecy." "I never asked to bear anything," I said, "except maybe coffee." That earned me a few glares sharp enough to cut steel. The princess translated my words differently, though, something solemn and poetic that made the council pause. Judging by their nods, my desperate plea for caffeine had just become an allegory for endurance. The debate raged. Some argued the fleets should place themselves entirely under my command. Others insisted I was a fraud, a trickster sent to destabilize them. A few proposed trial by ordeal, because apparently the duel hadn't been dramatic enough. I whispered to her, "Do they always yell this much?" "Only when they are nervous," she said, "which means yes, always." The shouting grew so loud that I covered my ears. She leaned closer. "They will test you again, I think, assassination attempt." I nearly choked. "You think, as in maybe, possibly. Oh, that's just great. Nothing says good morning like a side of attempted murder." She patted my arm comfortingly. "Do not worry, they will fail, probably." As if on cue, the lights flickered. A shadow moved among the upper balconies. I didn't even have time to react before a figure leapt down, blade gleaming. The room erupted in screams. Soldiers rushed forward. The assassin lunged straight at me, and I did what any trained warrior in my position would have done. I ducked, tripped on my own sock, and crashed into the princess. The assassin's blade missed me by a hair's breadth and instead struck the dais, sparks flying. Soldiers swarmed the attacker, dragging him away in shackles. The council shouted louder than ever, arguing about omens, about betrayal, about what my clumsy dodge meant. Apparently, me falling over counted as some kind of sacred gesture of humility. The princess was laughing so hard she had to lean against the wall. "You are Incredible. I'm a disaster, I corrected, climbing to my feet. If this keeps up, someone's going to worship my laundry. And I wasn't entirely wrong. By the end of the session, a faction of priests had declared my socks a holy relic. They wanted to enshrine them in a temple. I had to wrestle them back before they ran off with them. That night, I paced my quarters restlessly. The Armada outside was more than ceremonial. It was power enough to conquer half the known galaxy. And now it was staring at me, waiting for me to sneeze, trip, or mutter something sarcastic so they could reinterpret it as divine instruction. The princess entered quietly. She sat across from me, boots squeaking faintly, and studied me with that unnerving calm of hers. "You are afraid." "Of course I'm afraid," I said. "Everyone wants me to be some kind of cosmic savior. I'm just a mechanic who once jury-rigged a life support system with chewing gum and duct tape. That doesn't make me a leader." Her ears twitched, "But it makes you clever and kind and different from them." I rubbed my face. "Different doesn't win wars." "No," she agreed softly, "but it might prevent them." We sat in silence, listening to the low hum of the ship around us. Finally, she leaned forward, resting her hand over mine. "If they try to use you, you must use them first. That is how survival works." I sighed. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for survival at this scale." She smiled. "Then keep being amusing. They do not know how to resist it." I laughed weakly. "So, humor as a weapon. Guess I've been training for this my whole life." Her gaze softened, "And maybe compassion as well." Outside the viewport, the Armada shifted, ships tilting in eerie synchronization, as though bowing once again. I stared at them, feeling smaller than I ever had, and muttered, "All this because I gave you my shoes." She squeezed my hand. "Yes, and because you made me laugh." And for the first time, I realized she wasn't just teasing me. She was serious. The next morning, the princess was already awake, perched at the edge of the viewing deck, staring out at the Armada as though the stars themselves were whispering secrets to her. I shuffled in with bed hair that defied the laws of gravity, clutching a steaming mug of synthetic coffee. She didn't turn around when she said, "They are waiting for you." "They've been waiting for me since I tripped on a sock and nearly got stabbed," I muttered. "Honestly, I don't know why they don't just put me in a museum already. Maybe behind glass with a plaque, 'The Accidental Savior.'" She glanced back at me, her lips twitching. "You laugh, but they would do it." "That's exactly why I'm laughing," I said, sinking into the chair opposite her. "Otherwise I'd be screaming." The day stretched out with 1,000 small crises. Priests wanted to know if I approved of a new hymn they had written, based, alarmingly,